High in the Andes Mountains, a darkness stirred. It was a place of breathtaking beauty, where the peaks kissed the sky and the valleys whispered ancient secrets. Yet amidst this natural splendor, an evil presence began to take root, casting a long, menacing shadow over the land. It wore a human face, but its heart held only malice. This darkness was not born of nature, but of a man whose soul was twisted and corrupted. His eyes, cold and devoid of empathy, reflected the abyss within. This was Pedro Alonso López, a name whispered with fear and revulsion. Known to many as the monster of the Andes, his very existence was a blight upon the region. His story is one of unimaginable horror and sorrow. He was the monster of the Andes, a serial killer who preyed on the innocent. His victims, young girls, these were children with dreams and futures, snatched away in the most brutal of ways. The fear he instilled in the hearts of families was palpable, a constant, gnawing dread. Their lives cut short in the most brutal of ways. Each broken doll, each faded photograph told a story of a life interrupted, a future stolen. The pain of their loss echoed through the mountains, a haunting reminder of the evil that lurked among them. This is his story, a journey into the heart of darkness. It is a tale that delves deep into the psyche of a man who became a monster, exploring the depths of his depravity and the impact of his actions on countless lives. The world first became aware of López's atrocities in the early 1980s. The headlines screamed of his heinous acts, and the public was gripped by a mixture of horror and disbelief. How could one man cause so much pain and suffering? His crimes, however, had been staining the Andes for years. Long before the world took notice, the mountains bore silent witness to his brutality. The bloodstains on the rocks, the desolate crime scenes all told a story of relentless cruelty. He moved like a phantom, leaving a trail of sorrow and despair in his wake. His ability to evade capture only added to his terrifying legend, making him seem almost supernatural in his elusiveness. Hundreds of young lives were extinguished by his hand. Each life lost was a light snuffed out too soon, a future that would never come to pass. The grief of the families was immeasurable, their sorrow a testament to the depth of their loss. Each one a tragedy. Together they formed an unspeakable horror. The collective weight of these losses was a burden too heavy to bear, a dark chapter in the history of the Andes that would never be forgotten. Born into poverty and neglect, López's early life was a breeding ground for darkness. His mother, a prostitute, offered him little love. Instead, he experienced cruelty and abuse. The world, it seemed, had already turned its back on him, and so the seeds of evil were sown. As a young boy, he displayed disturbing behavior, cruelty to animals, a fascination with death. These were warning signs, but they went unheeded. The darkness within him grew, twisting him into something monstrous. By his teenage years, he had already committed his first murder. The victim, a young girl. His descent into depravity had begun. López's reign of terror spanned 3 countries, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. He preyed on young, vulnerable girls, luring them with promises of gifts or money. Then he would unleash his savagery, torture, rape, and finally murder. His methods were chillingly consistent, reflecting a mind consumed by darkness. In Ecuador, he targeted young girls selling chewing gum on the streets. Their poverty made them easy targets. Their disappearances often went unnoticed or unreported. This allowed López to operate with impunity, his crimes multiplying with each passing month. He became a phantom, a whisper of fear in the hearts of communities. In 1980, López's reign of terror came to an abrupt end. This was a man who had evaded capture for years, leaving a trail of devastation across multiple countries. His crimes were heinous, and his ability to remain undetected was both terrifying and baffling. He was caught by a group of villagers in Ecuador. These villagers, driven by a sense of justice and desperation, took matters into their own hands. They had grown tired of living in fear, knowing that a predator lurked among them. They had discovered the bodies of 4 young girls. The sight was harrowing, a grim reminder of the evil that had been hiding in plain sight. The villagers' discovery was the catalyst that finally brought López to justice. López, it turned out, was nearby. He had been watching, perhaps even relishing the chaos he had caused. His proximity to the crime scene was his undoing. He was subdued and handed over to the authorities. The villagers' bravery and quick action ensured that López could no longer harm anyone else. At first, the police did not believe the extent of his crimes. They were skeptical, unable to fathom the scale of his atrocities. It seemed impossible that one man could be responsible for so much suffering. His confession seemed too horrific to be true. The details he provided were chilling, painting a picture of a man devoid of empathy or remorse. Each revelation was more shocking than the last, but the evidence was overwhelming. The physical proof of his crimes was undeniable. The police had no choice but to accept the horrifying reality. López led investigators to the graves of dozens of his victims. Each grave was a testament to his brutality, a stark reminder of the lives he had destroyed. He recounted his crimes in chilling detail. His lack of remorse was evident as he described each murder with a disturbing calmness. It was as if he was recounting mundane events rather than the horrific acts he had committed. There was no doubt he was a monster. The investigators, hardened by years of dealing with criminals, were visibly shaken by his confessions. They had never encountered someone so devoid of humanity. He was found guilty of murdering over 100 girls. The courtroom was filled with a palpable sense of relief, but also a deep sorrow for the victims and their families. Sentenced to 16 years, the maximum sentence in Ecuador at the time, it was a sentence that many felt was far too lenient for the magnitude of his crimes. Justice, it seemed, had been served, but the sense of closure was fleeting. The sentence did not seem to match the severity of his actions, but a dark truth lingered. 16 years was hardly enough for the magnitude of his crimes. The victims' families were left with a sense of injustice, knowing that the man who had caused so much pain would one day walk free. The mind of a monster, madness or method. During his trial and imprisonment, psychiatrists attempted to unravel the mind of Pedro Alonso López. What drove him to commit such unspeakable acts? Some argued he was insane, driven by a darkness he couldn't control. Others saw a cold, calculating killer who enjoyed inflicting pain and suffering. López himself offered little insight. He remained detached, almost bored when recounting his crimes. He showed no remorse, no empathy for his victims. His lack of emotion was perhaps the most chilling aspect of his persona. It spoke of a profound emptiness, a void where human compassion should have been. In a move that shocked and outraged many, the world watched in disbelief as Pedro Alonso López, one of the most notorious serial killers in history, was released from prison. Pedro Alonso López was released from prison in 1994. Known as the Monster of the Andes, López had confessed to the brutal murders of over 300 young girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. He had served only 16 years of his sentence, a mere fraction of the time one would expect for such heinous crimes. The brevity of his imprisonment left many questioning the justice system's effectiveness. The reasons for his release remained shrouded in controversy. Official documents and statements provided little clarity, fueling speculation and conspiracy theories. Some claim it was due to overcrowding in the Ecuadorian prison system. The facilities were bursting at the seams, and authorities were forced to make difficult decisions about who to release. Others suggest he was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial in Colombia, where he faced further charges. Psychological evaluations painted a picture of a deeply disturbed individual, but opinions varied on whether this should have led to his release. Whatever the reason, his release sent shockwaves through South America and beyond. News outlets across the continent and the world reported on the story, and the public's reaction was one of horror and disbelief. How could a man who had confessed to murdering hundreds of children be allowed to walk free? The chilling reality of his crimes haunted the collective consciousness, and many feared for the safety of their communities. The decision sparked outrage and fear. Protests erupted and people demanded answers and accountability from their leaders. The sense of injustice was palpable. Many believed he would kill again. The fear that López could return to his old ways cast a dark shadow over the region, and parents held their children closer, wary of the lurking danger. His release served as a stark reminder of the failings of the justice system and its inability to truly address the depths of human evil. The case of Pedro Alonso López remains a chilling example of how justice can sometimes falter, leaving society to grapple with the consequences. The whereabouts of Pedro Alonso López remain a mystery to this day. Some believe he fled to Colombia, seeking refuge in the anonymity of the sprawling slums. Others whisper that he returned to his old hunting grounds in the Andes, his bloodlust still unsated. His disappearance has done little to quell the fear he instilled. Across the Andes, his name is still spoken in hushed tones. He is a bogeyman, a cautionary tale whispered to children, a reminder that even in the most remote corners of the world, darkness can lurk. And sometimes that darkness wears a human face. The case of Pedro Alonso López continues to fascinate and horrify people around the world. His crimes tap into our primal fears, exposing the vulnerability of innocence in the face of pure evil. True crime documentaries, podcasts, and books delve into his story, seeking to understand the motivations of a man who could commit such atrocities. But the answers remain elusive. López's psyche, like the dark depths of the Andes where he once roamed, remains largely uncharted. Perhaps that is why his story continues to resonate. He is a chilling reminder that some evils defy explanation, leaving us to grapple with the terrifying randomness of violence and the enduring capacity for cruelty that exists within the human heart. The legacy of Pedro Alonso López is a dark stain on humanity. But within the horror, there is a lesson to be learned. His story highlights the importance of addressing childhood trauma, poverty, and societal neglect. These factors do not excuse his crimes, but they offer a glimpse into the conditions that can breed such darkness. By understanding the root causes of violence, we can work to prevent future tragedies. We must strive to create a world where children are safe, loved, and protected. A world where the shadows of monsters like Pedro Alonso López are kept at bay. Only then can we truly honor the memory of his victims and ensure that their suffering was not in vain.